Hello everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel of Get Set Law by IMIS. I'm your verbal ability mentor Sanjana ma'am, and today let's decode another editorial. I've already done a couple of editorial decoding videos before, so for the ones who are new to this, you may definitely go ahead and watch those videos as well to gain more insights. And with that being said, let's begin with today's video. Okay, again, these are the important takeaways we can have from whatever the discussion is going to be. Identifying the important ideas, decoding the contextual meaning of the words. So if there are difficult words given, and if we do not know the meaning of the words, how do we actually determine the meaning based on the context, right? Because very often CLAT is going to give you questions of this sort. And then another very important part would be, are we supposed to read every bit here verbatim or word for word, or we can skip some information? Because this is a very common question that would arise in the mind of a lot of CLAT ELIT aspirants as well, right? So with that being said, let's begin with today's decoding. So this is a relatively more CLAT relevant topic that I have. It's based on writers, it's based on literature, right? So this is more important because if you go by CLAT 24 and 25 standards, you will see a couple of passages of this sort. Okay, so let's just imagine that a similar passage gets asked in the exam or in a certain mock. And obviously, we are aware that in a mock in the exam, we do not have a title given. Instead, we are being asked title-based questions. So let's just almost believe that the title here is not given. Although, I would want to explain what the word predicament means. Predicament means when you're in a dangerous situation, right? You're in a dangerous position. You're in a situation of difficulty. Okay. So the title here says the writer's predicament. So essentially, this is going to be a passage which will be of a slightly negative tone because we're talking about maybe the problems that the writers today face. Right? So let's begin with the first part here, which has to be the introductory paragraph here. Never before have times been so challenging for those who don the mantle of a writer, composing articles, tweets, blogs, or social commentaries. The first statement itself will tell you that the author here wants to talk about some challenges that writers today have to navigate. Okay. Now, he also cites the freedom of speech and expression, which is heralded as a fundamental right. But at the same time, the paradox is that the writers do not quite get to exercise these rights today, right? Because they are caught up in these invisible barriers. So there are some obstacles, some hindrances, making the act of writing or typing a cautious exercise rather than a liberating one, right? So the writers here essentially will have to be very, alert, circumspect, vigilant. Okay. And I think there's a lot that we can assume here, although in CLAT, it's a rule. We don't have to assume anything unless it is explicitly given in the passage. Or if a question and assumption gets asked, but this topic seems quite, relevant these days. I think all of us are familiar with the content that is to come next. Okay. So what is the dilemma here? It's also a very poignant dilemma for freelance writers who, despite the allure of independence, we have a new word here, allure of independence. So it has to have a positive meaning to it. Allure means charm, right? The benefits, the charm of independence. And despite this, they often find themselves caught in complex constraints. And then we go on to say that the notion of freelancing is more often than not a comforting illusion. Okay. So freelancing, as far as, we would know about freelancing, it's talked about in very positive terms, but today it's more of an illusion, right? Maybe it is fraught with its own set of challenges. Okay. But my question is, while reading this, is the passage going to talk about freelancers only, or is the passage going to be on some other point? So don't always get stuck on one particular idea. Try and read everything else that's given before you make your own assumptions. Okay. Now, if I want, I can sort of just cancel the next paragraph, except for some words that I'm able to spot, and it's vanity or self-promotion. So the moral of this part is that even if you want to skip a statement or two, make sure if there are any keywords or adjectives being used, you take note of it because you can utilize these keywords in choosing the correct options. So the question on this information be asked, right? So it does say that here the author wants to address the unbiased, impartial, thoughtful, responsible individuals who write with a social conscience, not those driven solely by vanity or self-promotion. So obviously here the author is also trying to lay down a distinction between writers who are actually writing for a certain vested interest of theirs and writers who actually write because they believe in the charm of writing, right? They find it liberating. Okay, now here the author talks about the problems, okay, this part onwards, that as conscientious writers, we are perpetually aware of the delicate boundaries, the numerous Lakshman Rekha. So Lakshman Rekha here is being used metaphorically. That must not be crossed whether knowingly or without knowing also. So the word inadvertently means something that you do without knowing the consequences of it, right? You just do it. It could be by mistake. It could be by a mere surmise, right? So inadvertently is the opposite of knowingly. All right. So what are the challenges here? What if a writer, while writing something, oversteps the boundaries, right? Because, there are these topics of religion and faith, and if we tend to write on it, we might be labeled as, progressive or aggressive, leftist or rightist. This information is going to come forward also. Okay, so the volatile realms of regional and national politics. So we really have to navigate a very tightrope here, right? A very difficult tightrope. So in addition, writers also risk becoming vilified in public debates. You get labeled, you sort of get insulted, you sort of get mocked, right? About racism, casteism, feminism, misogyny, body shaming, and so on. So this part is very important. There are so many problems, so many barriers that the writers have to keep in mind while writing something, right? And then the author goes on to talk about some more realms that the author is bombarded with incessantly in today's times. There's print, there's broadcast, social media, all report war crimes. There is war crime, there is social cultural apathies, human suffering, cruelty inflicted upon the defenseless, right? And this relentless, another very nice and a very important word, high frequency word. Relentless is something which you do unabated, something which you do continuously. So there is this continuous exposure which evokes a deep shared anguish amongst the readers also, right? And the feeling of helplessness that we feel are all testimony that humanity still lives on. And for writers who are moved by such cries, the impulse to speak out candidly is natural. Now, in this particular part, for the ones who feel a little bit confused about this, we're just trying to talk about how the writers feel so deeply about these topics. And even when they write on these topics, the audience collectively is able to feel the problems that are being faced. Now, I'll tell you something. The broader idea here, the umbrella idea which I feel the author is trying to talk about here, is the risk that comes with writing today, especially freelancing, right? And so many risks that writers have to navigate. Because if you just read right from this particular paragraph till the very end, the author is talking about the variegated risks, right, waiting for a writer to face, right? There is misinterpretation, mislabeling. Neutral or context-specific commentary is also easily twisted or distorted. If I have to just make a mere statement, somebody would just try to misinterpret it, right? And make something else out of it. Somebody might just say it's a very leftist opinion or a rightist opinion, progressive, regressive, or labeled as intellectual arrogance, right? Regardless of what the original intent of the author is. So the space for genuine free expression narrows. Very concrete statement this is, right? So ultimately, again, towards the very end, here the author still goes on to talk about the various predicaments that the writers are facing today. So you understand how potent the title here is, and a good title is supposed to reflect the main idea. And throughout the entire paragraph, what we are reading, in short, is the main idea and nothing else, right? So take it as a learning what a good title is. I've tried to clarify what the title-based question can be. What's the trick to solve it? A good title should always reflect the main idea, right? Now, the author at the same time is also talking about some of the daring, writers who try to confront the uncomfortable truths as well without caring for the risks that come with it, right? So the history of writers who dared confront uncomfortable truths is sobering. So he's naming a couple of them. Galileo is there. Salman Rushdie is there. Right? Murugan's struggles against cultural and political censure is also there. And their experiences are haunting reminders. So just take a look at this term, right? It's a negative picture that is being painted of the experience. That hitting the nail on the head, it often demands circumspection. You have to be very careful. You might have to be politically correct also. right? Metaphor, or you'd rather stay silent as a writer, which ideally goes against the very idea of being a writer, because writing is something which is thought of as a liberating activity. If you do ask me how am I inferring it's liberating, because here the word liberating has been used by the author. Always focus on the key words. You see, keywords will help us understand most of the information correctly. Right? So writers today have to balance courage with caution, purpose with prudence. Prudence is wisdom. And this paradox, okay? And I did use the word paradox also, defines our times and challenges, the very essence of what it means to be free in expression. So today, if I have to, let's just say, frame a question on inference, which of the following can be inferred from the passage? Out of the 4 options, there will be one option which I can say, freedom of expression today, the very idea of it has been distorted. So this is a correct inference, right? Because freedom of expression is not truly what it is supposed to be, because there are these shackles that the writers are bound by, right? It's a very paradoxical situation today, because you have to balance courage with caution, purpose with prudence, etc., etc. So I can easily frame a good set of 5 to 6 questions from this passage alone. One question could be based on a title. I can just remove the title. I can extract this, put it as a passage, and I can ask you a question based on title. I can ask you a question based on the main idea. I can ask you a question based on inference. I can also ask you a question based on figure of speech, and one question based on vocab. So you see how easy it is to fashion so many questions out of a simple passage. But if I want, I can take this up a level by making it very difficult also, right? So that's how you're supposed to read it. Here, I would say this is very simple. This should be read in under 3 to 4 minutes properly, with being able to retain and comprehend the information, right? So that's about this article. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you've understood it. If you really like it, do let me know in the comment section. Thank you.